Okay, so like imagine that feeling, that feeling of being watched, but constantly. Not just when you're out, like in public spaces, but like inside your home.
Inside your home, yeah.
Often like,
On the coins in your pocket.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That's kind of creepy.
That's creepy, right? And that's the world that we're going to be diving into today
Yeah.
based on the excerpts that you sent me from 1984.
Yeah, and I think what's so fascinating about looking at this fictional dystopia is how it really kind of brings to light some fundamental questions that I think we all grapple with about power and control of information and what it means to be an individual, what it means to be free.
Right? And to not be free.
Exactly, and to not be free. And the excerpts you've provided, you've given us really rich material from not only the daily life in the society, but the political structure, the intensely personal struggles of people who are living under the thumb of this incredibly oppressive state. Yeah, and so what I'm hoping to do in this deep dive with you is to really tease apart what are the core mechanisms that are at play here that are maintaining this control.
Yeah.
You know, like how is it that the surveillance apparatus works? How is information manipulated? How is individual thought? How is authentic human connections systematically eroded in this society? What are the aha moments that we can get about the nature of power itself from looking at these excerpts?
Absolutely. And I think a good place to start would be with probably the most obvious element of control, which is this constant surveillance.
Hmm.
The excerpts paint a picture where privacy is virtually non-existent.
Right, and it starts right in Winston's apartment with the telescreen.
Right there.
And the thing about the telescreen that's so creepy is that it's not just a passive receiver of information, it's two-way.
Always on.
It's always on, and, it's always broadcasting the party line, whether it's, some random stat about pig iron production figures or...
Yeah, or like announcements about, the latest victory in some far-off war.
Right, exactly. But it's also observing you can control the volume somewhat, but it cannot be turned off.
And I think what that does is it creates a sense of self-censorship because, you're always being watched, so you start to internalize the party's rules and almost police yourself before the thought police even need to step in.
And then you have the omnipresent posters of Big Brother.
On every landing.
On every landing, it's there, and it's that, the face with the dark mustache and the piercing eyes that seem to follow you, and the caption, Big Brother is watching you.
It's so in your face. Yeah, it's just this constant reminder that you were under surveillance.
Yeah, and it really drives home this point that there's no escape from surveillance, whether you're awake or asleep, indoors, outdoors, even in your own mind, because the only thing that you can truly own is the few cubic centimeters inside your skull.
And even that is not necessarily safe because we have the ever-present threat of the thought police.
Right.
And thought crime is the one crime that you can't really hide forever.
It's inevitable.
It's inevitable.
Right. So this lack of privacy, this constant sense that you are being watched really sets the stage for the role of the thought police and how terrifying this society is.
Absolutely. And I think this kind of surveillance really ties into the party's broader strategy of control through fear and ideology.
Mm.
And one of the most prominent examples of this is the way the ministries are presented.
Yeah.
Particularly the Ministry of Love, which is described as this windowless fortress that you can't enter unless you have official business. And even then, it's incredibly intimidating with these gorilla-faced guards and, barbed wire and machine gun nests everywhere. It's clearly a place that you don't want to end up.
No, and then you have these really well-orchestrated events like Hate Week.
Hate Week, right.
Which isn't just, patriotism. It's a frenzy of they amp up the propaganda.
Yeah, it's like a manufactured hysteria almost.
Right. They implement these hardships cutting off the electric current as an economy drive.
And it's all very ritualistic too, right? The Tuminous hate, this daily spectacle where everyone gathers around the telescreen to express their hatred for Goldstein, the party's enemy.
Yeah, Goldstein, who's
the ultimate
enemy.
The face of the enemy. Yeah, and even the speeches that the orators give are very formulaic. They're very standardized, and they use a lot of newspeak, which is this language that's been designed to limit thought.
Right, and so it's interesting because they're not just saying hate this guy.
Yeah.
They're giving you the language, the very words to hate him with.
Absolutely. And they're also providing you with a scapegoat.
Yeah.
Right. Someone to direct all your frustrations and anxieties towards.
Which really distracts from the party itself, right?
Exactly. It's a very effective tactic to maintain control.
Yeah, and then of course there's the party slogans that are everywhere. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength.
Inscribed on everything.
Yeah, posters, coins, book covers, everywhere you look.
Yeah, it's a constant bombardment of these paradoxical statements that are designed to really warp your sense of logic and make you question your own perception of reality.
Yeah, and it kind of makes you just give up, right? Like if you can't even trust your own thoughts, what can you trust?
Exactly. And it's a very effective way to make people complacent and to accept the party's version of truth no matter how absurd it may seem.
Yeah, and then there's the role of children in all of this, which is particularly disturbing.
The children, right, they're
Yeah.
actively encouraged to spy on their parents and report any unorthodox behavior to the party,
Through the
the
spies.
spies. And
Yeah.
they're like little fanatics.
Yeah, it's like they're being weaponized.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're taught to worship Big Brother
Yep.
and to see their parents as potential enemies of the state.
And the example of the Parsons children accusing Winston is just heartbreaking. It shows how this indoctrination can really poison even the most fundamental family bonds.
And it makes you wonder, what happens to these children when they grow up? What kind of adults do they become in this society?
Yeah, it's a question that the book really leaves you to ponder.
It really does. And I think another key element of the party's control is this systematic manipulation of information and history.
Absolutely. Winston's job in the records department really highlights this. It's his job to literally rewrite the past.
To rewrite history to make it conform to the party's current narrative.
Yeah, so could you kind of walk us through what that process looks like?
So whenever the party's past predictions or statements are contradicted by reality, Winston and his colleagues have to go in and create revised versions of these records. They use these speakwriters, and then they send the new versions through pneumatic tubes to be disseminated.
And the old ones.
The old ones get destroyed in the memory hole.
So there's no record of the original.
Exactly. It's like they never existed.
So it's a constant process of erasing and rewriting the past. And this applies to all forms of media, newspapers, books, films, everything. The source describes history as a palimpsest, scraped clean and reinscribed exactly as often as was necessary.
And the effect of that is that there's no objective truth anymore. There's only the party's version of events.
Yeah, and that's where Comrade Ogilvy comes in, right?
Comrade Ogilvy, the perfect party member who never existed.
Fabricated from thin air.
Fabricated entirely by Winston to serve the party's propaganda needs.
And this all ties into this concept of doublethink, which is essential for surviving in this society.
Doublethink the ability to hold two contradictory beliefs in your mind simultaneously and accept both of them as true.
It's like consciously forgetting that you ever knew something that contradicted the party line.
It's a form of mental gymnastics that requires a complete surrender of your own critical thinking abilities.
Yeah, it's like saying black is white and believing it.
And the party uses doublethink to maintain its grip on power by ensuring that everyone is always on the same page ideologically.
Right, so let's talk about how this affects individual relationships, because it's not just about politics, right? It seeps into every aspect of people's lives.
Absolutely. The party controls everything down to the most intimate details of people's lives, including sex and marriage.
Yeah.
The only recognized purpose of marriage is to produce children for the party.
Yeah, and sex itself is seen as something almost dirty.
Yeah, a slightly disgusting minor operation.
It's like they're trying to eradicate pleasure.
Yeah, and they even have this organization called the Junior Anti-Sex League that advocates for complete abstinence.
Wow, and they even encourage artificial insemination.
Right. The goal is to completely detach sex from any kind of personal desire or emotional connection.
And this really comes through in Winston's failed marriage to Catherine. It's a completely loveless and sterile relationship that's ultimately destroyed by the party's influence.
It's a stark contrast to his affair with Julia, which is much more passionate and rebellious, but also shrouded in secrecy and fear.
Right, because they're constantly under surveillance.
They can never truly be themselves or express their love openly.
And they have to talk by installments, as Julia puts it.
They can't risk revealing too much at once.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to see how this environment can warp and distort something as beautiful and natural as love.
And it shows how the party seeks to control every aspect of human experience, even the most private and intimate ones.
And then there's the party's view of the proles, the working class who make up the vast majority of the population.
Right. The proles are seen as kind of like an underclass. They're considered to be too stupid and uneducated to pose any threat to the party.
Yeah, they're just left to their own devices as long as they keep working and breeding.
They're allowed to indulge in their simple pleasures like drinking beer and watching films and gambling.
But Winston sees them as a potential source of hope
He has this fleeting belief that maybe they could be the ones to overthrow the party.
because they're not as tightly controlled as the party members.
Right, but ultimately the party doesn't see them as a threat because they lack the intellectual capacity to organize a rebellion.
And they're easily distracted by their base desires. So even though this world is so bleak, there are these little glimpses of rebellion and hope that flicker throughout the story.
Right, Livingston's act of writing down with Big Brother in his diary.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
It's the ultimate act of thought crime.
And his encounter with O'Brien, that brief moment where he thinks he's found a kindred spirit.
It gives him this sense that maybe there are others out there who feel the same way he does.
And the rented room above Mr. Charrington's shop.
Their little haven away from the telescreens.
Yeah, where they can be themselves even for a short time.
But of course it all comes crashing down.
Yeah, because Mr. Charrington turns out to be a member of the Thought Police.
It's a devastating betrayal that shows just how far the party's reach extends.
Yeah, and it leads to Winston's capture and imprisonment in the Ministry of Love.
The place where they break you.
Yeah, it's a descent into a psychological hell. The constant light, the isolation, the torture. It's all designed to strip Winston of his individuality and force him to conform.
And O'Brien becomes the embodiment of the party's power. He's the one who oversees Winston's re-education.
And it's not just about getting Winston to confess.
It's about making him believe.
Yeah, making him love Big Brother.
O'Brien insists that the party controls reality itself, that 2 + 2 can equal 5 if they say so.
And he introduces this concept of black-white.
The ability to believe anything the party tells you, even if it contradicts your own senses.
And then there's the ultimate horror of Room 101.
The place where they confront you with your deepest fear.
The thing that will break you completely.
And for Winston, it's rats.
And in that moment of terror, he betrays Julia.
He begs them to torture her instead of him.
It's a complete surrender of his love and his humanity.
And it marks his final defeat.
Yeah, because after that, he's released and he's a shell of his former self.
He becomes a true believer. He loves Big Brother.
He sits in the Chestnut Tree Cafe, drinking gin and accepting everything the party tells him.
He even believes the news reports about the victory in Africa, which we know are probably fabricated.
And his final encounter with Julia is just heartbreaking.
They've both been broken. They've both betrayed each other.
There's no love left, only emptiness.
The party has won.
So what are the big takeaways here? What have we learned about the nature of power from diving into this dystopian world?
Well, I think it shows how power can be maintained through a combination of surveillance propaganda and psychological manipulation.
Yeah, the party controls information, it controls history, it controls people's thoughts and emotions. It's a truly totalitarian state.
And it shows how easy it can be for people to conform, even when they know deep down that what they're being told is a lie.
Yeah, especially when the alternative is so terrifying.
And I think it leaves us with a really important question to consider. What are the subtle ways in which these mechanisms of control might be operating in our own world today?
Right. How do we resist the temptation to conform, to accept the easy answers, to surrender our critical thinking abilities?
It's a question that we all need to be asking ourselves.
Absolutely. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure as always.
Until next time.
Stay vigilant out there, folks.